Excellent. So welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for our afternoon uranium panel. Hope you're all enjoying the event. So uranium is quite the buzzword at the moment, with spot prices reaching a 12-year high, as Murray kindly informed me last night, $82 per pound. So is this pricing surge the sign of a nuclear renaissance, do you think? And Murray, you can start.
What was the question again, Katie? I was too excited about the uranium price. Yeah, is it the start of something? It certainly is the start of something, isn't it? We're finally seeing investors, the spot price starting to move in the positive direction because the supply demand curve has always been a big issue for us. There's not supply to meet demand, and we're seeing sellers pulling their sell orders because they know that there's the buyers are going to follow them up. So there's not a lot of it's tight spot market, but we know 90% of the market is contract. It's not spot, so we tend to, and that's the most transparent indicator we've got of the price. But certainly, I was just saying to Ross 2 years ago, I would ring brokers and they wouldn't take my call. Now brokers are ringing me and I'm trying to work out whether I want to talk to them. So it's very much turned around, and it's fantastic for the industry.
Anyone next?
I would say the Renaissance actually even began probably 3 years ago is when we really started to get a sense of it. And, I'd say probably the fall of 2020 was the real turnaround. I mean, it's been super exciting this calendar year, just the sector, and a lot more eyes are on it. But I think it was really 2020 that we started to see clean, green energy as a focus. You just saw governments around the world, the policies change, starting to accept nuclear to a much greater degree. I think now what you're maybe seeing is the investment community catching up to it, and really, it is starting to take on a life. But we do think I think all of us probably believe we're in a long uranium bull market, but that started a few years back, and I think we're quite a few years ahead of us.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with Ross on that. I think probably the people who've been in the uranium space for a while now have had the feeling that the renaissance is coming. And certainly 3 years ago, when we got involved in uranium with Lotus, we were certainly very, very bullish on where the market was going to go. And I think the investors and probably the general population are starting to catch up on that. I certainly think in the last couple of weeks, as we've seen the price, go above the $80 per mark last night, I certainly think we're getting a lot of positive sentiment coming in from the population now, from the general people.
Excellent. And what do you each consider as the key factors driving supply-demand dynamics specifically? It's open. Anyone can start.
I'm happy to take that one first.
Yep.
So I suppose there's a couple of things that are driving that at the moment. I think there's been this energy security thing is one of the key things at the moment. I think everyone's trying to find out a way of how to secure their own energy supply moving forward. I do think nuclear provides one of the solutions for that. It's a relatively small volume of material that's required to be moved around to be able to generate that amount of electricity that you need. There's certainly the net zero discussion as well. And I think any country that's out there that's talking or understands how they're going to get to net zero by 2050 is considering nuclear within that solution. I think that's a really, really important part of it. I think those are really the two main things. Yeah.
And maybe just to pick up, I think what we're seeing is the electrification of everything, and I mean everything is becoming electric. It's cars. It's everything we own is plugged in. So there's more and more demand for what we consider clean energy. But the important part of that equation is being able to generate the electricity in the first place in a clean manner. And if we were trying to migrate away from dependency on fossil fuels, there's really, to your point, there's really no other alternative, except for energy or for nuclear for base load 24/7 power, 365. That's where nuclear plays such a key role.
Yeah, and renewables were touted as the answer, and we're finding that they aren't. I mean, we're also discovering that carbon emissions generated from generation or manufacture of solar panels are far greater than they ever said. Wind farms are a real issue. They got 25% efficiency, as you say. Baseload power is not there. But the other one, so really the failure, if you call it that, of renewables is impacting positively on nuclear. The other one is Germany's not a great case, but I read this the other day, 50 million vehicles in Germany. If 2% of those, 1 million of them, were electric and charged on the grid at night, that is a doubling demand on the grid. So these countries are talking about going 100% EVs. Have a guess what? You haven't got the energy to do that. So, you've seen maps of Great Britain where to generate the amount of electricity you need, the wind farm area, the solar farm area is enormous, right? And when I was walking home from the restaurant last night, I noticed that the sun wasn't shining. So there was no solar energy anywhere. So it certainly, I think the failure of renewables is really driving it, and sentiment towards uranium is just changing.
Excellent. Well, you've spoken about the sun not shining. Let's talk about some of the challenges faced by the nuclear industry. Often experience shows that construction is over budget and delayed. Do you ever feel nuclear power can realise the level of scale and standardisation necessary to achieve economies of scale?
What project isn't running over budget at the moment? I live in Western Australia, and supposedly we're a first world nation. And I can tell you, I saw the sign on the road saying, road closed till May, and this was in January for repairs. And that June come around, so they changed it to June. July come around, they changed it to July. This went on for 8 months. So it's not just the nuclear that's having issues with that, but I think those sort of issues are sort of behind us a bit. There was a period of time where there was focus on how long the project took to build and how much over budget it was. But that was during a period where I think there was a lot of other things happening. In the last sort of 5-10 years in particular, we're seeing an improvement on that. So they're budgeting correctly, and we're seeing a much improved time frame.
I do think if you look at the Chinese as well, the way that they've been able to tackle their massive build, I mean, they're quoting 58 months now for building a nuclear reactor, and they seem to be able to keeping with that time frame as well. So there's certainly lessons that can be learned from what they're doing. We know that, for example, KHNP, when they're building their reactors in the Middle East, have also been able to deliver those both on time and on budget as well. So there's certainly precedent out there that companies can do that kind of stuff. I would expect as we get more reactors rolling out that they'll become more and more common as we go forward.
So do you think there's often a discrepancy between construction of reactors in the US compared to China? Do you think, how will the West combat those discrepancies? How do you think they'll construct to the same level in the same time periods?
I think there's an issue of regulation there. I don't think the Chinese are as heavily regulated as perhaps the US is, and probably that influences it as well. But again, regulations depend on consistency and quantity as well. So the more nuclear reactors that are likely to get built, the more the regulatory approval process will get streamlined. So that's why I see things going forward.
I think I'm quite in agreement with that. I think that's absolutely true, and I think China's been on an absolute tear in building reactors and SMRs too. By the way, the small modular reactors, they've been innovators in the business, but they're able to build them. I think just the way the regulatory environment there is probably a lot more straightforward than the complexities elsewhere. But we're coming around.
Anything to add? Okay, let's look at your own operations a little bit closer. What would you consider as incentive pricing for mining projects such as your own?
That's a good question, and I'm not going to answer it for our projects, but I will talk about our peers in Namibia. Two of them come out, and I won't say their names. Two of them come out 3 years ago and said they needed $65 a pound. There was a uranium conference in Adelaide last week. I didn't attend, but our CFO did, and he said both of those CEOs were asked, would they go at $80 a pound? And there was a one-word answer with 2 letters, no. So we're seeing inflation affect prices, both capital and operating. And I don't know what it's done. We're not at the study phase yet. We're moving down that in the next year and a half. So we'll find out what it is. So I really can't answer that from our point of view, but hearing those CEOs, there obviously is inflationary issues.
So I think incentive price, I guess there's a couple of ways to look at it. Globally, I think it's pretty safe to say, I think the common consensus is incentive price probably well north of $90 these days in order to make a lot of projects go on. But again, it's different in each jurisdiction, each area. These, there's quite a diversity of types of deposits and where they're located. You get different grades, different size of deposits. We still know that the lower incentive price would be those projects probably in Kazakhstan. They can get uranium out of the ground at probably less cheaper than anybody else. And I think coming in a reasonable second would be projects in Canada's Athabasca Basin, where you have high grade projects. I know in our case we've completed a feasibility study. I think we've got a reasonable expectation on what would be incentive price there. Our all-in sustaining cost would be about $14 US a pound. So that would require lower incentive prices. There's high capex to build and everything, but I'd say the incentive price in the Athabasca is probably closer to $50 or $60, but it's really different all over the place. But at 90, I think you're kind of looking at a global average. I mean, that's my estimate, I suppose.
Okay.
Yeah, I think there's a few things to add on to that, as well as I think depending on the style of the project as well, I would expect that an ISR project would have a lower incentive price than a hard rock project. But I do agree that Athabasca Basin, with the grades that they've got there, are probably lower than some of the other hard rock projects out there. I'd also think the type of project you've got, I mean, for example, we've got a brownfield project where we're starting an existing asset. I do believe the incentive price to be able to start a project up like that is probably lower than a greenfield project moving forward. I think it's from a risk perspective as well, when you consider the risk of starting up a greenfield project versus starting up a brownfield project. I think you'll probably be prepared to take a little bit of a lower price as a brownfield restarter than you are as a greenfield restarter.
Yeah, just Athabasca Basin was brought up. I've been asked about Athabasca Basin versus Namibia, and we're talking percentages of grade in Athabasca. We're talking 100 to 500 ppm in Namibia. The point I make is that Rossing Uranium Mine, running at 320 ppm now, hard rock, 450 metre deep pit, the longest continuously operating uranium project in the world, 47 years. So that demonstrates that PPMs in Namibia can still sustain an operation. So yeah, there are different challenges in different jurisdictions, as you pointed out before, Ross, but certainly from a Namibian point of view, they've been able to operate for that period of time. So they must be doing something right.
Excellent, thank you. So let's look at investment into the sector. So we've got funds such as the Spot Physical Uranium Trust purchasing uranium on the spot market since 2021. Do you think the activity of these funds creates kind of a temporary buzz in terms of uranium investment, or do you think there'll be a sustained level of investment from investors outside of this kind of funds?
Go ahead. I think they were certainly a catalyst. When we started seeing the sequesters come in I guess it was the spring of 2021. Yeah. That really made a difference, and I think that's what really started kicking the price of uranium up, moving it off of its, out of the doldrums, and it was a very, very important catalyst. I think where we sit at right now, it's not quite as important anymore. So now that things are in motion, I think it's different. It's a little bit more utilities coming back in and people scrambling for supply. We know it's a very tight market to begin with, but so it's sort of taken on a little bit different emphasis than just the sequesters, the spot, and the yellow cakes. These kind of funds that are moving the price up. They were the initial catalyst, and now it's, I think, a little bit more wholesome.
I think maybe to add to that, I mean, I agree that totally that Spot and them have been the really kicked off the movement in the spot price. But I think what's really important to note is, though they bought large volumes of uranium last year, they haven't actually bought a lot this year, and we haven't seen a drop off in the spot price on the back of that. So it's not only dependent on them. There's also other players in the market that are also maintaining that spot price as well.
Okay.
I was going to say exactly what Ross said. Snap catalyst was the spot.
Okay. Fission. Okay, so let's move on. Should we talk about the security of the nuclear supply chain against things like the backdrop of the war in Europe, coups in Mali, and growing political tensions? What types of new risks need to be considered?
It's a hard one, isn't it?
We're looking to you, Murray.
We didn't want to talk politics, but we are, aren't we? Geopolitical risk is certainly huge. Niger, you failed to mention there, projects were looking pretty good in Niger. Now they're not. So, obviously, well, one thing that people may not know is the 42% conversion capacity in Russia. That's not likely to be sanctioned because the US need the uranium coming through from there. So there's a lot of geopolitical risk. There's a lot of uncertainty. So I think investors have got to start looking at reliable countries, that don't have the issues. So I'll say Canada first because Ross is sitting next to me, but Namibia, 47 years of continuous operating for Rossing, where you are, Keith. I don't think you've got too much of an issue there. So us three are probably in the better jurisdictions around the world when you compare to some of the risks for production. But then, of course, as I talked about, you've got conversion issues as well, enrichment issues.
I think one interesting thing is what will Australia do about uranium production? I think as you start to see less and less supply coming in from some of the other countries, do you think the political opinion in Australia is going to change? You might see Western Australia and Queensland and probably even Northern Territory starting to look at mining more uranium. Be interesting.
Yeah, look, the AUKUS agreement with the nuclear submarines, one of my mates from the golf club works for the submarine division, and they travelled around the world looking for subs, and certainly that aspect of it is, we've got to do. You can't have nuclear subs that you have service somewhere else. So we've got to bring that in, and the super funds from the unions are starting to talk about nuclear. I mean, that's Labor essentially, and Labor against it. So interesting when you talk to individuals within WA, Western Australia. For those people who don't know what WA is, the individual politicians say they like uranium, but as a party they don't. So surely the individuals are going to sit together as a party and say, listen, we need to change our policy. But yeah, imagine what SMRs can do for a country like Australia that's vast. Canada's vast. If you had a copper electrowinning project in the middle of nowhere, you put an SMR on it, you're paying 7 cents or 6 cents per kilowatt hour instead of 30 odd cents. The value add is enormous. So if the government weren't as short-sighted, they would see the value add, the benefits to the nation, and they would change their policy fairly quickly, you would think.
On the geopolitical front, too, I think what we're seeing, or at least the evolution in the uranium sector, I think is a bit more of a bifurcation of uranium. Rather than it traded globally, I think you're starting to see a little bit of a separation, and I guess has to do partly, with the wars in Ukraine and this. The material out of Kazakhstan is probably getting spoken for more from China and for Russia, rather than making its way currently, 20%, I guess, of production currently comes to the U.S. But I think what you'll see, the Western utilities, there'll be much more emphasis on uranium coming out of those other jurisdictions, Canada, U.S., anything probably any of the safe jurisdictions, that we're talking about, Namibia, Africa, as opposed to the Kazakhs. That'll be, it'll just be a little bit more of a local consumption, I think, on the market.
Okay, on a little bit more of a lighter note, what are some of the technologies changing the nuclear value chain moving forward?
Make a big bold statement here. What about fusion? It's been a couple of articles about that lately. Is that going to be a significant changer? Certainly not in the short term, but
okay.
Not in my lifetime, I don't think.
I don't think so. Not in my lifetime either, I don't think.
Depends where's the nuclear chain start? Does it start at production, Katie? Is that what you're referring to as well, or are you talking about?
Wherever you would like it to start.
Well, we actually going to need a lot more uranium, right? So where's it going to come from? We talked about the lower grades in Namibia. We've developed a process as Elevate Uranium to lower the cost for processing these style of ores to the point where we reject 95+% of the mass, end up with less than 5% that you leach. So then you've got akin to a base metal operation where you can move that concentrate away for a value add, or you do your value add on site. So I think technological advances, innovativeness, right, in both the way you explore, the way you process, our mining operation. I mean, 95% of the copper is deposited within 15 metres of surface. Sorry about that. We're really shallow. So mining becomes quite simple, right? And, your mining method is just a surface miner, digging it up, no drill and blast. So just the way we think about things. We've just got to think a little bit outside the box, knowing that we're going to need a lot more uranium. And you might think that 200 ppm might sound low grade, but 200 ppm in Namibia in time is going to be very, very, very good.
Anything to add? Nope. Okay, just as a lasting thought here, just to round things up, how can we round up the outlook for nuclear? How would you summarise?
Very, very exciting. Is that enough? No. Obviously, we're talking about the supply-demand issues. We don't have enough supply to meet nuclear demand. What is there, 26 reactors in India already? Who knew that? Bangladesh building. The Arab states are building. Even this country is building, isn't it? They're talking about, they've got a Rolls-Royce and the UK government have got the SMR program. I think SMR is going to play a huge role in the future because they can replace a coal-fired power station. You don't have to build a new grid. Renewables, you've got to build a whole new grid. So, and the value add that SMRs could do. I mean, in the middle of Canada, in the middle of nowhere, right? You've got power from an SMR, middle of Australia. Some remote sites are going to really need it. So, I think it's a very, very bright future. And if you think the uranium price is going to get under $100 a pound once it gets there, you're dreaming. This is going to be well in excess of 100. And we're going to see what you see. People scramble over the top of each other when they get, the FOMO comes in. So, uranium price gets to 100. People are going, hey, shit, this is real. And all of a sudden, our share price doubles and triples in a period of time because there's a FOMO. We don't want to miss out. So I think it's like utilities that some will start buying, but then the worst thing a utility can do is run out of fuel. Doesn't matter what they pay for it. So they'll be scrambling over the top of each other to buy. So I think there's going to be a huge movement there. And I think you're going to also find a market for new buyers for uranium projects. I think utilities, maybe somewhere, I can see something, but I don't quite understand what it's going to be yet. But they want to shore up supply for fuel for their reactors, right? So they're going to probably have to come down to that level and pick up some assets and to make sure they've got supply.
I've been in the uranium business, I guess, since, just shy of 40 years now. And this by far feels like the best time in the sector. I think the fundamentals are just so much stronger right now. And that's at every level, right? From the clean, green energy that it was always promised, but poorly communicated, I suppose. That seems to be a very important cause. We talked about small modular reactors, and it's not just changing bigger reactors into smaller ones. It's putting nuclear into places where it wasn't even fathomable before. Your comment, Maria, on remote locations and all over the world. There's just more and more places for it, and I think the safety record in the nuclear sector is unparalleled. And it's just, I think it's really catching on, and it is the future.
Yeah, I think future looking is probably one of the best comments to make about it. I certainly can't see many countries being able to move forward in the future without having some acknowledgement of what nuclear can do for them from an energy supply. So certainly future looking for me.
Excellent. Well, that draws us to the end of our panel. Thank you so much for being here today, and thank you for watching.